Welcome to AskFOI, where we answer the most common questions we receive about prophecy, Israel, and the Bible. With me is Dr. David Gunn. Welcome, David.
Thank you, Steve. Glad to be here.
David, in the Old Testament, we see a few different covenants that God made with Israel. We see the Abrahamic covenant, the Davidic covenant. There are others. There's one that precedes Abraham, the Noahic covenant. What is the Noahic covenant, and is it still valid today?
So the Noahic covenant, I suppose the most straightforward answer is it's a covenant that God made with Noah. A covenant itself is somewhat analogous to our contract or treaty. That's really the idea behind a covenant in the ancient world. You would undertake a covenant when you were establishing a formalized legal relationship between a couple of different parties. And that's true of all the covenants in the Bible. With the Noahic covenant, we have such a formalized legal relationship being established between God and Noah and his progeny. The context obviously is this is post-flood. God has judged the world for its sinfulness, and now it's almost like he's starting over with Noah. Noah emerges from the ark, and God establishes this relationship with him. Several covenant requirements that God gives to Noah in this passage, and the passage, incidentally, is just the tail end of Genesis chapter 8, starting in verse 20, down through chapter 9, verse 17. God gives Noah these instructions. Here's how I expect humanity to conduct themselves during this new dispensation. Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth is the first one, which is a reiteration, of course, of the command that he gave to Adam and Eve back in the beginning. So that sort of reinforces this idea that this is like a new beginning for humanity. He permits humanity to eat meat, apparently for the first time. Up to this point, it seems that he had only authorized humanity to have a vegetarian diet. Now he expands that to include meat, but he asks humans not to ingest blood. Blood symbolizes life, and so as a sign of respect for life, God says, I don't want you to eat meat with blood in it. And then third, murder is prohibited. And when people do commit murder, God institutes this principle of capital punishment, that if a man sheds blood, then by man shall his blood be shed. And that's a means of establishing justice and establishing the significance of the sin. So that's what God expects Noah and his progeny to do. At the same time, God makes several covenant promises. God makes certain commitments. Here's what I'm going to do, or as the case is here, here's what maybe I'm not going to do. He says he's not going to curse the ground again. He had cursed the ground, of course, after the fall back in Genesis 3. He says he's not going to double down on that and curse the ground again. He will never again wipe out all life or virtually all life on earth as he had just done in the flood. He's going to place the fear and the dread of the animal kingdom, he's going to place the fear and the dread of humanity upon the animal kingdom. Seems to be a protective measure designed to cut down on the amount of violence that perhaps was there before the flood and in the days leading up immediately to the flood. And then finally, and most memorably, God promises that he will never again wipe out the world by means of a global flood as he had just done. And the rainbow, of course, the covenant sign, is meant to be a reminder of that promise. So that in a nutshell is what the covenant entails. Certain responsibilities for humans, as well as certain covenant promises or commitments by God himself. You asked if the covenant is still valid today, if it's still in effect today, and just looking at the text here in chapter 9, it certainly looks like it to me. This covenant does not appear to be conditional. That is to say, there's nothing in the text here that indicates that the covenant would become invalid at any point in the future. And quite to the contrary, some of the language here really sounds perpetual, unconditional, and eternal. Notice, for example, verse 12. God said, "This is the sign of the covenant that I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you for all future generations." Seems pretty comprehensive there. Similar language a few verses later, verse 16, "When the bow is in the clouds and I see it, and remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is on the earth," and so on. So yes, I would see this as still being a covenant that is in effect today.
How would you answer someone that says, well, do we avoid blood now? Are we okay if we have blood in the food? Is that still in place?
Right. Well, I would understand this covenant to still be in effect, and so I do think that is something that God expects us to avoid. Interestingly, the prohibition on the ingestion of blood is something that is repeated once in the New Testament, in Acts chapter 15 at the Jerusalem Council. Now there you don't have a covenantal context or a legal context, but you do have the officials of the church, in a very early stage of the church, requesting that Gentile Christians abstain from ingesting blood. So it's a somewhat controversial question, and not everybody would see it the same, but from my understanding, that is still something that God expects us to do.
Very good. Thank you, David.
Thank you.